Well, let's see if we can bang off another video or the final video, or, well, I said potentially 4, so we'll see how that works out. But let's delve into this. Let me get on the old bifolks here. And let's start off with that famous quote by Meyer Amschel Rothschild. Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its law. Now, I would say that this quote, whether he said it or not, is perfect as a law of a nation which has attained its sovereignty and so has the right to create its own money, is not held to the law as a law is for the people, not fictions of law. So why would the commercial market care about the law? They wouldn't, right? The basic principle of MMT, or modern monetary theory, is to correct the political narrative as being an old school platform that serves to control a population by policies which obfuscate the truth about how the government should interpret the relationship with money. Now, to be clear, no one from MMT actually described it this way. These are my own words, so don't look for it and see whether or not MMT researchers had even said it this way. But MMT's platform essentially is to prove that our nation's focus should not be concentrated on the deficit, but rather the true cause of inflation. Inflation is foundationally caused by too much money in the private sector chasing too little goods. MMT's core is to focus upon supply constraints, as discussed in an interview chaired by Dr. Yuri Shasford of Money and Macro Talks, who was featuring Professor Stephanie Kelton of MMT, an MMT advocate who published a New York Times bestseller book titled The Deficit Myth. In fact, that book is sitting to the left of me as we speak. And she goes on to say in the interview, the government does not budget as a household, which we said it in the first chapter. We cannot run out of money, but you can run out of things to buy. And as soon as you say that, you are speaking about supply constraints, unquote. Would this align with our thoughts presented in video 2.5? And if a government can never run out of money, then is it a corporation? A corporation who can experience insolvency? So what does this mean according to our indoctrinated held beliefs that we are all contributing to the demise of our future generations' wealth, basically buying things today using the money of those not yet born, that our deficit proves we owe money to some force, but who is this behind the scenes force that we are noticed to be donating our labor to grow and maintain a structure, and that every baby born today is in fact enslaved by the very foundational premise whereby this baby now becomes a part of the general population and so automatically owns a owns, I guess owns would be a better word, a proportionate share of the country's deficit. When just considering the logic of the latter, that slavery means at heart being a debtor, in contrast to the concept of involuntary servitude, which is being forced against one's own will, and keeping in mind that slavery was abolished in the 19th century, yet according to how it appears today, backed by the common public sentiment, everyone is enslaved by the very evidence we each owe a portion of the government's debt. The operative word here is the government's debt. Are you government? You will come to know, hopefully through this mini video series, that if you are in fact a debtor, that's a very good question to have answered, if in fact you are a debtor. And so like all things so far learned, it is rather perhaps our misinterpretation of what the system is versus the law that keeps us in a mind fog. We know that our labor is produced in value the very moment more money is put into circulation, which devalues the once 100-cent back petrodollar to be reduced to a mere 3 cents by today's standards, which means it's not backed by a commodity such as gold or silver, since we would never experience a value drop. More money inserted into an economy automatically reduces the cost of our labor until we reach, own nothing and be happy comes to mind. since our labor is no longer measured against a corporate type value. I remember as a kid, and yeah, I know you've heard it many times, that a single paper Canadian dollar at a convenience store bought a chocolate bar, pop, chips, and an assortment of candy, to which I am almost certain that chocolate bar at the time was bigger than what it is today. It is something else to consider that when contemplating this idea that a sovereign government can simply print its own money, and so in reality it paid zero money for your labor. In fact, if we were to dissolve our governments today, because it is, and knowing that it is the creator of our money, it would not even lose the idea of a single penny. Let that swirl among within the old monkey mind for a spell. And it just continues to get juicier from here. Modern monetary theory, or MMT, was created through the mind of Warren Mosler. His profession, before adopting his theory, evolved from his 40-plus years in the private banking sector. Warren used a simple common sense approach to serve as his access point in order to explain the true relationship between government and money, essentially realizing that a power of a sovereign government is the ability to create its own money. Therefore, a U.S. or Canadian or likewise politician to pound upon his pulpit that government needs to budget according to how a household operates is complete and utter nonsense, for the very undeniable fact that a household does not create its own money, in which it can then spend. We do not control or have access to our very own printing presses, or have, in our backyard, the ability to sit under the shade of our own very own money tree. Yet, we may, if we think through the roots of law. In fact, your federal government does not need to tax or borrow in order to fund itself, because it can just simply order the printing presses to be turned on. Of course, within its own self-imposed restraints. Yet state and or provincial governments, on the other hand, need to tax and borrow to fund themselves, since they are without the power to create their own money. Sounds like more like corporations, doesn't it? They restrain themselves through the government, that is, creating budgets, which they seem to always manage to burst through, so that it serves as a new benchmark for increasing their budgets for the next fiscal year. And these budgets are to make sure that the economy does not become too hot or cool down too fast, according to the output realized through GDP numbers. Like the story of the three bears, overreaching their decisions is the prospect of a looming bear market, a slowdown in GDP, namely, which will move the economy into a recession. Thereby, the primary goal is to find that point, which is just right. Again, I must admit, I do not possess fluent ease comprehending and then speaking this new language of economics, except for the possible catchphrase, I read, which reminded me of my days when I used to think that news was the truth, that taxation actually helped build roads and schools, that it was an honor and a duty to vote, and that public policy represented the well-being of each individual rather than what it truly represents today, a collective agreement to protect its construct as a single legal personality termed public health. And yes, I'm about to digress just to touch upon that topic about public health, because it was a major vehicle used for the last, and still is used for the last 3 years. Now, when I'm speaking to matters of public health, for instance, and so piggybacked upon the discourse contained in the video immediately before this one, part 2.5 to be more precise, I'm reminded of the plight of Dr. Jordan Peterson, whereby before he entered the courtroom to stand upon his principles and announce once again his Hippocratic oath before the public and of chambers, I knew he would lose in their arena, and I had voiced it openly as such, since he had failed to understand that his Hippocratic oath was instead an allegiance to protect public health, a fiction that became a person in law, a corporation namely, which means we have all agreed that a certain number of people need to suffer so as to stimulate our economies. His oath was to the system, not to a natural-born man or woman, as he perhaps still thinks it to be so. The reality is the same for every citizen, as we discussed in video 1. If you are holding any property under the office of any government and next those possessed by corporations, then it is proven by your very own actions that you have accepted to continue the demise of mankind by laboring under a person, an artificial one at that, who is given his power through our continued agreement. Think of it another way, whereby everything you own has an expiry date. Or as we used to say, they sure do not build things as they used to, namely to last. This is purposely built into the system for the benefit of the citizen who needs a job so it can afford to pay its share of tax. It's not making sense yet. It will, as we discuss more of Warren's theory on how money actually works. So if a government can print its own money, back on topic now, can it ever go into bankruptcy? Only, I would surmise, if it's a corporation, but not a body politic. This is a second reason why a government can never be compared to those balancing their checkbooks upon the kitchen table. And so when you hear this type of narrative used in the media, that they speak that the government needs to behave more like a household, you can shout out, poppycock! Or whatever comes to mind, subject to the ears around you. Why? Because they print their own money. Now, let us move into taxation. First question simply is, then why does the federal government tax or borrow money, then, if not to fund itself? Simple and straight answer is so they can control the amount of money in circulation by having these devices to do so. As Warren mostly explains, it is through the provision of taxes that money was then created. He basically describes that for a government wanting to control the economy within its assigned territory, this government must get the people to agree to the money that they create. To do this, they enact a tax, let's say upon the property you purchased. This purchase is represented in a piece of paper that identifies to the purchaser and all the world that you hold a security interest in which is then annexed to belonging to a certain status within the English law group. And thereby it gives the whole possession of a fee simple absolute, the largest or highest estate that one can hold as a tenant of the crown. This purchase is subject to property tax. Now, the only way to pay this property tax is through the money that the sovereign government created. Genius. And why they remove all other forms like gold and silver backed currency for their non-convertible fiat dollars. Then it compels the property owner to go out and labor for the very money that is necessary to pay their tax. Similar to shooting craps or playing blackjack in a casino, only those chips belonging to the creator can be used as money in order to begin play. This brings me to another point as relates to lawful money, meaning backed by gold and silver. There are some advocates out there, wanting this to occur. Now, let's just take that for a bit of a ride, shall we? Gold and silver, although stable, so does not experience a constant inflation, therefore devaluing our labor, means those who do not have, the have-nots basically, will always need it based on the system's mode of exchange. In order to fund their territories, it is back to the Game of Thrones, basically, that we have begun to put aside after we moved the despotic monarchy in 1688. If we are subject to needing gold and silver to build our societies, then those with the most will always control those with the least. And yet, then we are slaves. No longer are we construed to be free because we are now relying on gold and silver to control estates and interests in land. It doesn't work. I mean, think about it another way. In order to build your societies, if you had to use gold as the benchmark, that certain amount of gold had to be held in the government's purse. Now you're constrained to the amount of gold in that purse in order to build anything. So again, now production would have to slow down once in a while. So just like them controlling recession now, it would automatically happen. And all of a sudden we get to a point and say, okay, everybody, stop doing what you're doing. Put your shovels down. Stop stroking on that keyboard because we can't build anymore until we get some more gold. Let's go out and do some pillaging, plundering, shall we? Anyways, and if we are subject to needing gold, I think I already said that. As for, well, now that we're talking money, let's get into cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin being the central banking system's Trojan horse, as termed from a very well-known lady, which her name escapes me and I can't add it here, unfortunately, sorry, that this Bitcoin endeavor was to, which I'm sure is a CIA operation, was to lull and herd people eventually into the concept of accepting CBDCs, or central bank digital currency. They, remember, are a one-trick pony who used the same methodology that was experienced in 1933 when they introduced fiat notes, which made it illegal to hold real wealth, hard currency called gold. Bitcoin is now moving into making available ETFs. ETFs, or exchange traded fund, as stated by Meta AI, is a type of investment that allows investors to invest in Bitcoin without having to directly own the cryptocurrency. So not only are citizens drowning in the derivatives pool in synthetic trades, but they are now being subconsciously prodded into using a different form of an asset, not yet even convertible for immediate goods, to now establish another level of trade which does not have us hold the digital coin in the first place. They will now be able to trade in Bitcoin without holding the actual digital coin, which is not even tangible in the first place. How is this different than any type of ownership you hold right now? Is it tangible? So, there you go. Now that's why they're moving into the fourth level. It's all going to be imaginary, abstract thinking, more reifying unicorns in the marketplace. Now, returning to our primary topic, what is the role then of the central banking system? For instance, the Fed. The Fed, as described by MMT, is just a scorekeeper with the additional job of monitoring inflation based on the actions of government. The Fed is responsible for monetary policy in contrast to the government, who's in charge of fiscal policy. The Fed or its banks do not have any money. The government budgets for new dollars. The Fed, then type this new amount into government checking account, so as to allow the Fed to then move this money from his checking account into his savings, and then back again if necessary, in order to keep in step with the country's inflationary targets. Inflation target has always been, for some time now, well, not always been, to hover around about 2%. Now, I also want you to also think about the idea of a scorekeeper to keep in alignment with that comment that the Fed or the banks do not have any money. They have never loaned you a cent, don't ever loan money because they don't have it. The same premise as a scorekeeper. So if let's say the scorekeeper is keeping score in a football match, does he have only a certain amount of scores in which he can draw from in order to use during the match? No, it's unlimited. That's exactly as your Fed. It's unlimited based on the amount of money in circulation. That is true, but they're not limited by their own money. They're limited by the budgetary spends and which they need in order to keep inflation intact. Okay? So you've never borrowed money. Loans create deposits. Your signature creates deposits. Okay? You're acting as a vehicle, as a vessel for government. I'm not going to get into that right now. Like before mentioned, concerning their intentional suffering, I'm concerning that intentional suffering is necessary. It's built into the system whereby to maintain this rate of inflation means 2% of the population has to be unemployed in order to meet these demands against corporate interest, essentially playing musical chairs. Yeah, I meant that. MMT heads in the opposing direction when it comes to attaching inflation to employment numbers. They have proven we can maintain full employment without ever affecting inflationary numbers, and so have a model in which this can be done. All of it is built for the system, and so is MMT's fact-based theory ever going to work in the system? How would it? It's like, would hydrogen vehicles and free energy work in the system? No. So keep that in mind. Even though these things are correct, what is the system built for? Well, essentially to, as we mentioned in video 1, to come to terms of settlement of the trust for sale, move everything back into the box. That's not going to work if you have solutions, is it? Again, there's no one to blame. Okay? I'll repeat and reiterate. For any of it, since the laws are already written for our individual benefit, and instead we are volunteering to trade in these rights so as to become an actor in their production, being compensated, commensurate with the role we are choosing to play, our status. Today's headlines are peppered with news about the irresponsibility of global governments and their insatiable thirst for deficit spend. Jerome Powell announcing in a CBS interview, and this is not verbatim at all, and this is just I'm extracting from the content. On behalf of the Fed, he was stating that the government is acting like a child who needs to sit down before an adult discuss its bad behavior. Yeah, I know we sort of talk about it in video too. In this case, those in charge of monetary policy, called the Fed, are identifying as the adult. They are distracting, again, the status quo through the pointing of the fingers at corporate government for its continued raping and plundering of our future generations' wealth and the primary culprit that is driving the economy into a recession. Well, here's another fact. The amount of a nation's debt, let's use the good old US of A again, being at a jaw-dropping $34 trillion. If one was to hold a mirror against this graph outlining this deficit of $34 trillion, that image would be in exact proportion to the amount of money in savings, and as such, held in the private sector. The citizen is the private sector. The deficit actually tells the story of how much money is in the private, in your hands collectively now. So why do you think you owe a proportionate share of your country's deficit? Because instead it's rather evidence of the government's obligation to its corporations, while keep it in mind that the government really doesn't technically owe anything in the first place, because they created the money from their own policies, as it is the policies, like rights upon a title deed, that are the true intrinsic value. Yep. Goes down exactly like that. As aforementioned, yet great to repeat, government is the control of fiscal policy, and the Fed, since the 70s, is in control of monetary policy. And to be clear, and as told by MMT researchers, deficit spend means that the velocity of money will increase in the private sector, so as for a corporation's benefit, whereas budget surplus means a deceleration of money will be experienced within the private sector, thereby moving the citizenry into recession. In contrast, if the government began to be pleased with ironically, if the government was pleased and announced a budgetary surplus, the status quo would be cheering. Yay, finally! What does that mean? It means that they have restricted the creation of money. They turn off the spigots, essentially. So now your savings will not have to be used, and the GDP would shrink. So why are citizens cheering when it is publicly announced that the government has realized a budgetary surplus, when it is an indicator of less money in the market? Programming is the word of the day, pushed through what my family termed the idiot box, the master manipulator of every generation since. This is why the status quo has come to cheer. As we discussed in video 2, the velocity of money is no longer a measure of GDP, meaning a once reliable indicator of whether the economy was positioned to grow or shrink. Today we can speculate it is the Tri-City organizers that are purposely shrinking the global economies by reducing the amount of money in circulation, which compels their corporate persons to instead rely and so release into the market their savings. Again, please not hold me into the strict rules of how an economy works. I'm not an economist. And so rather you just assimilate the overall message I'm attempting to convey here. The topic not conveyed in a manner I'm speaking from, which this miniseries I have not heard anybody put together in such form. Okay? So I like to speak about things that are not spoke about often or never spoken about. Now, this type of money coming into circulation is now being available for taxation as consideration that was used before by means of money being tossed into an economy. For instance, quantitative easing is instead the money supply held by the private sector, which most consists of a margin of about 20 to 1 of synthetic trades versus actual collateral-backed securities. The citizen is being attacked by all sides. Their savings, cost of living, disclosure about the governments, their liberty and freedoms are all being diluted. Essentially, everything considered as the American dream is now a dystopian nightmare. In fact, it was always since no one knew the game that was really being played. They didn't realize that their handlers were playing chess while they conveniently gave you Monopoly. At least, though, those who decide to learn how to step away from this construct, the matrix, namely, that is designed to steal your labor through not knowing where your true body of rights lie. So what are the solutions as everything is being returned into the box? And as a note still of importance, I'm still seeking investors to help to have recorded the laws which evidence our right so that we can command a formal court of inherent jurisdiction to take judicial notice of our rights in law compared to those held by the monarchy, the governments, and of corporations. I'm talking about the book, namely, that I mentioned in video 76. This is necessary, in my opinion, to assist training future generations, but more importantly, to get on track right now, to train lawyers, not to do our bidding. We don't want them to speak for us. We want them for their knowledge in how to bring in motion through rules of evidence and to make sure we don't get manipulated or deceived by their very own right to do so. We want to make sure that everything is in accordance with the law and that nothing remains to be appealed. So like, share, and discuss this video, please. Any donation is also well received concerning sharing my work. As you most know, there is, I can't imagine the amount of hours I spend every day of the week reading or doing some research every day. And these videos for, I don't know, a week now, writing, doing things, stuff like that, learning, reading, just to do these videos. So, I'm not begging here. Any donation is greatly appreciated. And of course, money necessary in order to help create that book. Now, when I say that, there's a lot goes behind it. There's a lot of material to be brought forward. But most importantly, just recently, my mentor indicated I did not explain the estate interest properly, which most recently I just did in video 77. And so why I need to pin him down for a few months to assist in this book. He needs to be paid. He's got to be doing something. And he needs to be paid because this man is essentially going to fade from the public even further, which will make it more difficult in the future to get him to sit down and put his thoughts to paper, and so that we can have a book from which to use as a reference for ourselves to get ourselves removed from the system. With that, I leave you with a prospect of the fourth video to complete this mini-series, namely, what are we now to do with this knowledge I dumped on you? It's all yours now. Thank you for watching and sharing these topics with others. After all, at the end of the day, it is truly about our freedom. God bless.